Hello, welcome to Loremaster's Lair. I am your Loremaster. In the past, we have looked at some of the famous empires of the Inner Sea region's past, the Jisk Imperium, Ancient Syrian, and Sargos. Now, we are looking at everyone's favorite Sidhedron of troublemakers, Tassalonia. Tassalon. Expect me to continue to call it Tassalonia, despite that being wrong. That's unfortunately how I learned it, so. Also, I'm not sure if Sidhedron is an actual word, but it seems to be a natural evolution of Chimavum. Not the point. This is a history video, like the Gisco one. We don't have as much information on New Tassalonia, so we will mostly be talking about pure fall. We'll also be avoiding rune magic in general, since we recently got some new information from Secrets of Magic. I'll still be giving a few general tidbits, but most recent information is out. With those ground rules, let's get started. Starting, we should go back to the founders of Tassalon, the Aslanti. Thessalonians are just an offshoot of Aslanti, who broke off to start their own country. Over 1,000 years alone, they did become their own ethnicity. However, since we have only gotten minor information on the Thessalonians themselves, we will just be going with the biggest source of information today and go with the Aslanti ethnicity. So the first thing I should mention about the Aslanti, they are all dead. There are many who claim to be descendants of Aslanti, and the Teldon and Chilaxian ethnicities have some Aslanti blood in them, but all full-blooded Aslanti died in Orfall, and the last Aslanti, Eredin, if you know anything about Pathfinder, you have heard the story 1,000 times already. However, there are plenty with enough blood to show some typical Aslanti features, including bronze skin, delicate fingers better for crafting, artistry, and fighting, and red or purple eyes. Typical Aslanti names tend to have multiple syllables and start with vowels. Aslanti tend to have a fondness for hats, the traditional being circlets or crowns, with them being Aslanti, of course. But modern day descendants tend to settle for really tall hats. However, if there's one thing that sticks out the most among Aslanti, it is arrogance. The original Aslanti thought themselves the best. Thessalonians thought themselves above all of the lesser races they ruled over. And everyone praised the old Aslanti Empire in Eredin, so modern day people with Aslanti features tend to think they are inheritors of the best people ever to exist. Which I think is a good lead on to the talking about our main topic, Tassalon. Itself started with a man by the name of Zin, a skilled Aslantian wizard. He was a student of one form of magic which had been known by Aslantian civilization for centuries, but had been overlooked: rune magic. Through his studies, he thought he had unlocked the secret of rune magic and tried to convince groups to help him test his theories. He found none, especially when he suggested they interact with lesser races to do so. Aslanti civilization at its finest, of course. Refusing to be deterred, he and a small army of followers left the comforts of their homeland and settled on the coast of Avestan, in what is today Varisian, and parts of the land of the Norm Kings, and the whole of Beltska. Now we have started on a road to the minor beliefs in runes. Beliefs, because we need to talk about a god, which would be our first side tangent today. The part of the show where, big or small, we look and we remember. So, let's talk about Lissala. Lissala was a minor goddess of duty, faith, reward of service, and of course, runes from the Aslanti Empire, It is unknown if she was artificially created by vault builders, undescended serpent folk or Aslanti, a puppet of the Aboleths, or one of the first mortals to learn magic from dragons. Regardless of her origins, she appears as either a woman with no mouth, dressed in snake-scale robes with 6 ghostly rings, or as a creature with a snake's body, bird wings, and her head instead replaced by her holy symbol, the Sidhedron. She was a minor goddess who became much more important when one of her worshippers, Zin, founded the Tassalon Empire and focused on her rune magic. And whether it was her who drifted herself, or whether the practice of the Runelords affected her, she eventually drifted from lawful neutral to lawful evil. Some practices of the faith include the strict relationship between masters and servants, looking down on divination magic, and having spells tattooed on one's body so they could have the honor of becoming spellbooks after their deaths. Every boy's dream. Back on topic, it was not long until newcomers took over the control of Western Avestan, using their powers to control giants and charity to gain worship of the native ethnicities. The one group they did not conquer was the local kingdom of elves, Mirani. But the various Tassalon nations were powerful enough that the elves focused on diplomacy over anything else. Zin built his kingdom on what he referred to as the 7 virtues of rule: wealth, fertility, honest pride, abundance, ego striving, righteous anger, and rest. Or, instead, charity, generosity, humility, kindness, love, temperance, and zeal, depending on which list you're using, but the latter is probably the canon info, since it's the most recent. It was not long until Zin was able to focus on his research and proved his theories. Through the testing of rune magic and working of sky metals, he managed to create an object in the image of his goddess's holy symbol, the Sidhedron. With this, Zin came to a crossroads. Does he rule his people like an actual leader, or does he devote all his time into research? As the story goes, he went with research, leaving control of his Tassalon to his 7 greatest pupils, the original Runelords. He trusted them to live their lives by the 7 virtues and allow the country to blossom. Nope. You see, the 7 realized something Zin just did not. Rune magic was not powered by virtue as he believed so deeply it was, but by sin. Sure, the virtues worked, but it was lust, gluttony, greed, sloth, wrath, envy, and pride, which allowed runes to be used at their fullest strength. And so the group decided to push the country into one of depravity. And when Zin thought centuries later, maybe he should rule his own country, they managed to have him assassinated, his pride Sidhedron breaking into 7 pieces, which each of the Runelords took as a trophy. Which brings us to a second side tangent, the Sidhedron itself, which, as a legendary artifact, means a visit from everyone's favorite happy merchant. Here's a quick rundown. The Sidhedron is made from all 7 sky metals, as mentioned earlier. Very interesting that the Loremaster talked about them just last week. It's almost like I have a general plan on how I do things. Sometimes. Anyway, when a 7-pointed star is together, it really does not do anything. It is when they are separated that it gets really interesting. It is set to break into 7 when Zin dies, and point to the Edda pieces when they're separated, and resurrect Zen when they are together. I wonder if this ever happened. Well, here for items, not plots. Each of the 7 shards is connected to one of the sky metals, and one of the sins, and the school of magic, but that goes into explaining rune magic, which, no, not here for. Each also has a curse, a neon stone, and bonuses, but that is going up to be long for just side tangents, so let's just go with how the shards are made. Lust is made of deity. Gluttony is made of inubrix. Greed is made of adamantine. Sloth is made of abyssium. Wrath is made of sycotite. Envy is made of nocul. And pride is made of orichalcum. That was kind of a mess, but hey, so was Tassalon most days. So let's get back to it, shall we? And so came the rise of the Runelords. No, not the adventure path, the actual rise. I'll not go into the specifics of the 1087 years of debauchery, lasting from negative 6480 AR to negative 5293 AR, but I think I can list out the Runelords who ruled during the time. Don't worry, it's not going to be a list of names, but I'll just list the sins and the number of different Runelords who have held title. You can thank me later. First, let's get the 2 easy ones out of the way. Zandragul, the Runelord of Pride, and Shoshen, the Runelord of Lust, lasted the test of time and ruled the whole 1,000 years. 1,000 plus years. You know what I mean. Much more commonly, there were 5 different Runelords for Gluttony during the time, though I imagine the start and end times might be a little fuzzy, with them being the Necromancers. Wrath, surprisingly, also only had 5. Despite their sin making one expect they would be the ones who would be more willing to chop. Sloth had a total of 7 different Runelords. No clever comments on that one. Maybe about the irony of them actually putting in the work into killing their former holders, since that is how it usually goes. The one with the highest turnout rate was Envy, with 10 different Runelords, just under half of them lasting less than 100 years. However, the title of shortest lived was the first of the 8 Runelords of Greed, who only lasted 32 years. Not bad for a normal person, but when the overall average is closer to 200, On the topic of the Runelords of Greed, let's look at our third side tangent, another book for your players to look into. Today, it is another from Arcane Anthology, called The Runes of Wealth. The book is a spellbook of the second to last Runelord of Greed, Heframa, who his successor Khosrog did all his power to erase from history. However, this legendary tome's legend has been passed down, said to be the height of transmutation magic. It contains rare transmutation spells, both for objects and for the flesh of poor victims, and as well as containing information on anointings that change the effects of magical items. No original copies are known to exist, but potential fragments have been discovered, from a partial fragment from Absalom to a copy found in Kialmaga, which many agree is only a well-made forgery. There have been attempts to recreate the book, to the point of one being honored with the name of the original among scholars. We should also give a brief overview of the citizens of Tassalon. We're not just pretending the Runelords were all the life that existed. We already went over the natives of the region, the Shanti and the Vassirians, in my Varisian video. and how the great tyrants of the past still haunt them in their legends. The Runelords famously tamed giants, some willingly, some not so. They even created 2 unique breeds of giants. To command and control giants, they gave birth to the rune giants by infusing fire giants with the power of runes. They also developed a method of punishing those who resisted them by turning them inside out, referred to as inverted giants. Speaking of warping of bodies, ancient Tassalon was also one of the nations that adopted the practice of flesh warping. Those also their experiments are known as sin spawn. Finally, a species not unique to Tassalon, but worth mentioning. The Runelords gathered a large amount of loyal followers. Followers who would follow the Runelords even after they disappeared. Followers whose loyalty lasted even beyond their own death. This resulted in Tassalon ruins being guarded by a larger than average amount of grave knights, just in case any of you out there are tempted to try raiding one of these treasures of old. But going back, Earthfall happened, and the world ended. While Tassalon was not directly in the crosshairs of the meteor strike, it was close enough that many people ended up dying from the impact. The flooding sank 2.5 domains of the Runelords. And then there was the famine that came with the entire no sun thing. But the greatest blow was the Runelords, having seen the incoming disaster, had hidden away, leaving the nation without leaders. And so, the systems came apart. The slaves were freed, only barely remembering the terrible captives who they once lived under. Cities rotted away, leaving only some of the largest monuments, and Tassalon was forgotten, until 9,000 years later, when the first Runelord began to stir. Let us finish off our history with how the Runelord survived Earthfall, only to bring about our Runelord trilogy. Shoshin, the Runelord of Lust, developed objects called rune walls, which the Seven could use to escape the incoming ruin and get right back to their rule in 100 years' time. There's 2 things wrong with that. First, it instead suspended them for 9,000 years, instead of 100. Second, only half the Runelords were actually powerful enough to create rune walls. So, only the Runelords of Lust, Greed, and Wrath were actually used rune walls. Zutha, regardless of his actual power level, had the least to worry about, with gluttony being the masters of undeath. He split his book/phylactery into 3 to be reunited by his servants when everything was over. However, his servants kind of died during the whole Earthfall thing, so he had to wait for his rebirth. Kryn of Sloth had a similar problem, except he trapped himself in crystal instead. Belimaris tried to make a rune wall, but was not able to do so herself, so she asked for the help from Karzog. However, Greed was not the biggest fan of envy, so he purposely sabotaged the process. When Belimaris went to activate the rune wall, her entire capital was instead trapped in an endless time loop. Finally, Zandragul was able to create his own rune wall, but as the Runelord of Pride, he was not comfortable using a method created by another. He instead looked for the legendary Staff of Ages to allow him to just walk through time past the cataclysm. But when that failed, He stubbornly instead placed his main palace outside of space-time and put himself into suspended animation. But he also had a backup: the fact that he was a god. Say hello to side tangent number 4, the Peacock Spirit. You see, Xanagul, one of the 2 Runelords who lived 1,000 years without being offed, took the time to create the story of a demigod he discovered and spread the worship of the Peacock Spirit as far as possible. In fact, it was him all along, using his powers to grant strength to his worshippers to become a god. And he could do this because Xanagul was incredibly powerful. He almost was given the throne to his Atlantean Empire, only to lose to Eredin. This is the level we are talking about. Either way, Xanagul established a faith secretly around himself, formed an order of knights and orders of monks around the faith, had it spread across Tassalon so that most of his rival citizens unknowingly worshipped him, and through it all he also got a backup body in the form of an idol of the god. As for the worship of the Peacock god, well, what better way to get someone to worship you than to make your church and its teachings as hard to understand to the faithful as possible? Just look at various examples of recent religions that I would be hunted down by if I gave an actual example. Let us end this with the current state of affairs of Tassalon. All 7 Runelords have awakened with, canonically, 5 dying, while 2 stay in the world. The Runelord of Lust, Soshan, returned to the world, spending millennia re-evaluating her life and deciding she did not want to be an evil tyrant anymore, and is now hoping that she can use her half of New Tassalon to make the country better than it was in history. On the other hand, the Runelord of Envy, Belimoris, and her entire city, stuck in a time loop, has returned, bringing living Tassalonians to the modern world. And Belimoris has absolutely no intention of changing, and is the same Runelord the 7 of them have always been. So what is next for New Tassalon? Well, as much as I too would like to know, with how much emphasis the Runelords were given in 1E, stepping away for a while in 2E sounds just fine to me. So that is Tassalon, everyone's favorite lost/found empire. What path will the nation take from here, now with 2 Runelords back in the world, and with potential for more modern practitioners of rune magic to try to claim they deserve a seat? Either way, there's another lost kingdom we have crossed off our list. One day I'll have to find time to talk about the Cyclops empires and the nations we lost to the Eye of Abednego, among other smaller, well, not smaller kingdoms, but ones we have less information on. But either way, next video will be another god video. So I hope to see you for that one.